Hello everyone, I'm Jessamay Atchas and I'm the second reporter. I'm going to report about an interactive model of listening comprehension and the types of spoken language. Under an interactive model of listening comprehension, listening is not a one-way street. It is a two-way, which means a listener is not passive but active as he works at combining the sounds heard into meaningful pieces information. As we know, listening is receiving language to the ears. It involves identifying the sounds of speech, processing them into words and sentences. So we can say that listening is an active process in which the listeners plays a crucial role in constructing the message. So, listening is a two-way street because it requires a conscious effort to hear not only the words that another person is saying, but also understanding the message and its importance to the speaker. Next, it is not merely the process of unidirectional receiving of audible symbols. It means listening is an active process of converting meaning from spoken language. It is widely admitted that listening comprehension is not merely the process of unidirectional receiving of audible symbols, but an interactive process. Again, generally speaking, listening is a process of identifying and understanding what the speakers say, which includes understanding a speaker's pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary. To listen well, listeners must have the ability to decode the message, the ability to apply a variety of strategies and interactive processes to make meaning, and the ability to respond to what is said in a variety of ways, depending on the purpose of communication. One facet, the first step of listening comprehension, is the psychomotor process of receiving sound waves through the air and transmitting nerve impulses to the brain. But that is just the beginning of what is clearly an interactive process as the brain acts on the impulses, bringing to bear a number of different cognitive and affective mechanisms. In listening comprehension, it involved eight processes. First, process raw speech. The hearer processes what we call raw speech and holds an image of it in a short-term memory. This image consists of the constituents, which is phrases, clauses, cohesive markers, intonation, and stress patterns of a stream of speech. In this process, listeners take in raw speech and hold a phonological representation of it in working memory. They immediately attempt to organize the phonological representation into constituents, identifying their content and function. They identify each constituent and then construct underlying propositions, building continually into hierarchical representation propositions. Once they have identified the propositions for constituent, they retain them in working memory and at some point purge memory of the phonological representation. In doing this, they forget the exact wording and retain the meaning. So, this is the first processing of sounds from the speaker that will occur quickly along with the messages. Next, determine type of speech. The hearer determines the types of speech event that is being processed. So there are three examples of types of speech events here: a conversations, a speech, and a radio broadcast. In this process, it's important to determine so that we can able to understand what's the type of speech that we listen. Knowing this, we are better equipped so we can know if what's the type of speech that we listen. For example, if the type of speech is entertaining, informative, persuasive, and so forth. Third, infer speaker objectives. The hearer infers the objectives of the speaker through consideration of the type of speech event, the context, and content. So, for example, one determines whether the speaker wishes to persuade, to request, to exchange pleasantries, to affirm, to deny, to inform, and so forth. Thus, the function of the message is infer. In this process, the listeners understands the intention of the speaker, what type of sound is occurring, the meaning, and the content. Fourth, background information recall. So the hearer recalls background information or schemata relevant to the particular context and subject matter. A lifetime of experience and knowledge are used to perform cognitive associations in order to bring a plausible interpretation to the message. Um, Here, the listener thinks about how to understand the meaning of the topic. Fourth, and next, literal meaning assigned. Literal meaning assigned to utterance. The hearer assigns a literal meaning to the utterance. This process involves a set of semantic interpretation of the surface string that the ear has perceived. In many instances, literal and intended meanings match. So, for example, if one of your students walks into your office as you are modely grading papers and says she has a question that she would appreciate your answering, then says, "Do you have time?" The literal meaning of this, "Do you possess enough time now to answer me?" That is appropriate. However, this process may take on a peripheral role in cases where literal meanings are irrelevant to the message, as in metaphorical or idiomatic language. For example, a stranger sitting beside you in a bus has been silent for a period of time and then says, "Do you have the time?" The appropriate response is not a yes or no, but rather it's 8:45 or whatever. Second language learners must, in such cases, learn to go beneath the surface of such language in order to interpret correctly. So, in this process, giving the listener a common or true meaning. Next, intended meaning assigned. The hearer assigns an intended meaning to the utterance. For example, the person on the bus intended to find out what time of day it was. Even though the literal meaning didn't directly convey the message, how often do misunderstandings stem from false assumptions that are made on the hearer's part about the intended meaning of the speaker? So, a key to human communication is the ability to match perceived meaning with intended meaning. This matchmaking, of course, can extend well beyond simple metaphorical and idiomatic language. It can apply to short and long stretches of discourse, and its breakdown can be caused by these examples: metaphorical language, idiomatic language, careless speech, inattention by hearer, conceptual complicity, contextual miscues, and psychological barriers. So, in this process, the key to human communication is the ability to understand, the perceive, and the true meaning of the message. Next, Short or long term retention. The hearer determines whether information should be retained in short term or long term memory. Short term memory, a matter of a few seconds. It's appropriate, for example, in contexts that simply call for a quick oral response from the hearer, while long term memory is more common when, say, you are processing information in a lecture. There are, of course, many points in between. In this process, here, the listener processes what message should be retained or should be forgotten. So, the last process, the late form of original message. The hearer delates the form in which the message was originally received. The words, phrases, and sentences themselves are quickly forgotten, thrown, or cut away. For example, in 99% of speech acts, you have no need to retain this source of cognitive or clutter. Instead, retain only the important information. So, so these are the eight process in listening comprehension, and it's clear that listening comprehension is an interactive process. That's why all of these processes are very important since they are relevant to the learner's purpose of listening. Next is next topic is the types of spoken language. So this is the figure of a types of oral language, and it include monologue and dialogue. In monologues, when one speaker uses spoken language for any length of time, as in speeches, lectures, readings, news broadcasts, and the like, the hearer must process long stretches of speech without interruption. The stream of speech will go on whether or not the hearer comprehends. Planned, as opposed to unplanned monologues, differ considerably in their discourse structures. Planned monologues include speeches and other pre-written material, usually manifest little redundancy, and are therefore relatively difficult to comprehend, while the unplanned monologues include impromptu lectures and long stories conversations, exhibit more redundancy, which makes for ease in comprehensions, but the presence of more performance variables and other recitations can either help or hinder comprehension. Next, dialogue. Dialogues involve two or more speakers and can be subdivided into those exchanges, which is interpersonal and transactional. So, in the transactional conversation is the conversation that primarily involves the exchange of goods, service, or information. On the other hand, interpersonal conversation is the conversation that primarily involves the extension of personal and social relationship. In both cases, the above conversational descriptions apply, but the major and the highly significant difference is that in the latter the hearer is, as in monologues, unable to interrupt or otherwise to participate vocally in the negotiation of meaning. In all cases, remember that these categories are really not discrete, mutually exclusive domains. Rather, each dichotomy, as usual, represents a continuum of possibilities. For example, Everyday social conversation can easily contain elements of transactional dialogues and vice versa. Similarly, familiar participants may on a particular topic share very little common knowledge. If each category then is viewed as an endpoint, you can aim your teaching at appropriate ranges in between. So that's all about my report. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.